Hi, this is Jason. I'm coming at you from Shift Bicycle. Today I'm going to talk about some mountain bike maintenance intervals. These are more advanced type of procedures that typically a shop or service center would do, but it's a good idea to know when to do them and why you need to do them and to have an idea of what service is being performed when you do take it in. So the first thing I want to talk about is the hydraulic brake system. You typically have two types of fluids, mineral oil or DOT fluid. The DOT fluid brakes are going to need more frequent service because they do actually absorb a minute amount of moisture from the environment. So the functionality is going to be compromised. So that's typically done every year. I wouldn't wait longer than 2 years. Mineral oil is less, there's less of a need to do it, but I would still typically do it every season or every other season at the very least, because it does get some contamination from the brake dust through the calipers. So you want to keep that fresh, just keeps everything functioning smoothly, and it increases the lifespan of your components. And next we're going to move down to the other parts of the hydraulic brake system, the rotor, the caliper, and the pads. The rotor will typically wear over time and become thinner from this profile here, and there's a minimum thickness. Typically it's 1.5 millimeters, and that is measured with a dial caliper by your shop, or if you have one. You got to get right on the edge. So these are at 1.75. So we still have some life left. The next thing we're going to talk about is your forks and shocks. So the main service interval that you're going to be doing is the 50-hour service, and that typically applies across most shock brands. And the 50-hour service involves changing the oil in the lower part of the fork, because you have oil in the lower part of the fork here, and you also have oil on the inner slider where the damper is that slows down your fork when you're going over bumps. But the oil for the 50-hour service is going to be in the lower part here, and these seals right here, these are the slider seals. So that's done every 50 hours, typically by a shop or service center. But it is something that if you do feel competent in your skills, that could be something the home mechanic could take on. Then we're going to talk about the rear shock. The service for that, this is an air shock, air spring, and inside there's a small amount of air float fluid. So the 50-hour service for that would involve replacing these seals that are in the can and the fluid that's inside there, and that's also the more regular basic service. The advanced service for the fork and the shocks is going to be every 100 to 150 hours, and that involves disassembling the internal components. And that's a more advanced service that's definitely going to be done by a shop that's experienced with it. Most shops do not do the service, or a service center. And then the last part we're going to talk about today that's mountain bike specific is going to be the dropper posts. And dropper posts also need 50-hour service initially. And that involves replacing typically this slider seal here and some of the grease that's inside. It's a special grease, and some of the wearable components possibly. It depends on what it looks like when you open it up. So they also have a more advanced service, as do the forks and shock, every 100 or 200 hours, where it's completely disassembled with a parts kit that makes it function like new. And again, that's something that's typically not going to be done by a home mechanic. You want a qualified service center or shop to do that. And that involves also possibly bleeding the fluid. This is a cable activated line. You can see that. So that doesn't require extra service, but sometimes you actually need to bleed the lever itself. And that covers more of the mountain bike specific stuff. Another thing is the fork, the rear suspension pivots. All of these pivots right here have bearings inside, and they do get stiff because they only move through limited range of motion. They're not turning 365 degrees like your other bearings, and they can get rusty from water contamination. And one big thing is they're typically not filled with the proper amount of grease from the factory, even from reputable brands. So they're much more likely to become damaged and contaminated from the initial factory bearings. So if you get them replaced with a good quality bearing, then that second service is going to last much longer than your initial brand new bike did, which is something that people don't typically realize. So, and that'll wrap it up for this mountain bike edition. And we can get into more specific services for how to service your fork and how to service your shock. But today I just want to give an overview.
That's rad.